Ancient Greek actors wore masks not to hide, but to transform completely. We are journeying back to the very origins of theater to uncover the secrets stitched into every robe and carved into every mask. By the end, you will understand how a simple tunic and a painted face could tell epic stories to thousands. What was the true purpose behind those exaggerated, frozen expressions? And how did a single color silently shout a character's fate to the back row of the amphitheater? What does it feel like to stand in the footsteps of performers who shaped storytelling forever? Think of the actor standing at the center of that vast stone bowl, a tiny figure before a sea of faces stretching up to the sky. Their costume was not a matter of fashion, but one of pure necessity, a brilliant solution to a fundamental problem. How do you make a single human form visible and understandable to thousands of people, some so far away you were little more than a speck? The answer was built on two core pillars, the chiton and the himation. The chiton was a simple, full-length tunic, often sleeved, crafted from linen or wool. It was the foundational garment, the blank canvas. Over this, an actor would drape the himation, a larger, heavier cloak that could be arranged in distinct ways. But these were not just items of clothing, they were a visual language. A king would wear a long, purple himation, draped in a specific, dignified manner, while a slave might be shown in a short, plain chiton, allowing for frantic movement. Every fold of fabric, every choice of color, spoke volumes about who the character was before a single word was uttered. This visual coding transformed the actor from an individual into an archetype, a symbol the entire audience could instantly recognize, ensuring that even from the very last row, you knew immediately if you were looking at a hero, a god, or a beggar. This simple tunic was the very skin of the character. The chiton started as a rectangular piece of fabric, typically linen for a smoother drape or wool for a heavier presence. It was wrapped around the body and fastened at the shoulders by a series of pins or brooches called fibulae, creating sleeves of varying lengths. But its simplicity was deceptive, for its cut was a direct message to the audience. A long, ankle-length chiton signaled nobility, a character of stature and restrained movement. In stark contrast, a slave or laborer would wear a chiton cut well above the knee, a practical necessity that also visually communicated their role as someone engaged in physical, often frantic, action. This foundational garment was more than just a base for the more elaborate himation cloak. It was the anchor of the entire costume. Its design prioritized the actor's freedom of movement, allowing for the grand, expressive gestures that were essential for communicating emotion across the vast space of the amphitheater. Every leap, every slow, tragic turn, was supported by this most essential piece of theatrical clothing. Yet this foundational tunic was only part of the story. Draped over the chiton was the himation, a large rectangular cloak that served as a powerful cloak of distinction. While the chiton told you about a character's basic station, the himation revealed their specific identity, their wealth, their age, and even their philosophical status. It was a garment of profound symbolism, and how an actor arranged its heavy woolen folds was a deliberate act of visual storytelling. A politician or orator would wrap himself meticulously, with one end thrown over his left shoulder, creating an impression of dignified composure and civic responsibility. A traveler, by contrast, might wear it pulled tightly around the body for protection and warmth, signaling a journey or a state of displacement. The most famous style, associated with philosophers and deep thinkers, involved draping the himation over just the left shoulder and under the right arm, leaving one arm completely free for expressive gestures during a passionate speech. This was not merely about keeping warm. It was a costume choice that silently announced a character's intellect and their role in the narrative. A rich, deeply colored himation, perhaps of Tyrian purple, would instantly mark a character as wealthy or regal, while a plain, worn cloak could signify poverty or humility. In the visual language of the ancient theater, the himation was the boldest font, the clearest headline declaring exactly who was standing before the audience. But for the young, the swift, and the warrior, the dignified himation was far too cumbersome. Their stories demanded a different kind of cloak, one that spoke of action and urgency. This was the chlamys, a short, practical cape that was the very emblem of a life in motion. Woven from sturdy wool, it was designed not to drape in elegant, static folds, but to flow with its wearer. It was fastened securely on one shoulder, typically the right, with a single, distinct fibula, a decorative brooch that was both functional and a mark of personal style. This left the wearer's arms completely free for riding a horse, wielding a spear, or running at full speed. The chlamys had its origins in the rugged, practical attire of Macedonia, a culture renowned for its cavalry and martial prowess. When an Athenian playwright wanted to signal to his audience that a character was a soldier, a messenger, or a young man on a journey, he did not need a lengthy introduction. The moment an actor strode onto the stage wearing the chlamys, the audience understood. Here was someone from the outside world, a figure defined by movement and purpose. Its appearance promised news from a distant battlefield, a sudden arrival, or a swift departure. In the silent language of costume, the chlamys was a verb, a clear declaration of action that stood in stark contrast to the slow, contemplative sentences formed by the philosopher's himation. Even the ground beneath an actor's feet was a stage for meaning. While the flowing chiton and draped himation defined the body, the final, crucial layer of this silent language was found in the footwear. In the open-air amphitheaters, where every detail had to be visible from a distance, an actor's shoes were not merely practical, they were powerful visual amplifiers. The most iconic of these were the kothornoi, known to us today as buskins. These were not simple boots, they were elevated platforms crafted from wood or thick cork, strapping the actor into a stature that was literally larger than life. By adding several inches to their height, the buskins made the actor more imposing and far easier to see from the highest tiers of seats. But their function went beyond simple visibility. The height of the sole itself became a subtle indicator of social standing. A character of high status, like a king or a god, would wear buskins with the tallest platforms, physically elevating them above the other players on stage. In contrast, a common citizen or a soldier might wear a version with a more modest lift. For the lowest classes, slaves or characters in deep mourning, actors would often perform in simple sandals or even with bare feet, a stark and immediate visual cue of their humble or tragic state. This careful coding from the ground up ensured that an audience member, even one squinting from the last row, could understand a character's place in the world with a single glance downward. This silent language of costume even extended high above the actor's head, in a feature designed to be seen from every corner of the amphitheater. The onkos was a towering hairstyle or headdress, a construction of built-up hair, padding, and sometimes even lightweight wood that rose from the forehead in a grand, often curled, mass. Its primary purpose was starkly practical, to add critical height to the actor's overall silhouette, making the human form unmistakable against the vast backdrop of the scene. But the onkos was far more than a simple platform. It was an essential partner to the mask itself. The mask's frozen, exaggerated expression projected emotion, while the onkos provided the scale and grandeur that framed that face. Together, they created a single, unified, and superhuman figure. A character of great tragic weight, like a queen in despair or a vengeful god, would wear an onkos of immense height and complexity, its dramatic curls amplifying their stature and their suffering. In contrast, a character in a comedy might sport a more absurd or simplified version. This vertical exaggeration ensured that even the most subtle turn of the masked head became a visible, powerful gesture. The onkos completed the transformation, lifting the actor not just physically, but symbolically, into the realm of the mythic. This silent language of fabric and form was painted with a vocabulary of pure color. In the sun-drenched amphitheater, where every visual cue had to carry for hundreds of feet, the hues of a costume were not decorative, they were declarative. Each color shouted a character's essence to the audience long before the actor's first line echoed across the stone. White, for instance, was almost universally understood as the color of piety and purity, often reserved for priests, benevolent gods, or characters in a state of sacred devotion. Its stark brightness on stage would have immediately signaled a connection to the divine or a morally upright nature. In direct opposition stood the visceral power of red. This was the color of raw, untamed forces, of spilled blood, deep passion, and often violent death. When a character like the vengeful Clytemnestra in Aeschylus's Agamemnon appeared, her robes steeped in red, the audience would have understood the fury and the bloodshed that defined her story without a single word of explanation. The color itself was a premonition of the tragedy to come. The most exclusive and potent color of all was purple, derived from the incredibly rare and expensive mucus of the murex sea snail. Tyrian purple was a pigment so costly that its use was, in life, restricted to royalty and the supremely wealthy. On the stage, this real-world exclusivity translated directly into powerful symbolism. A character draped in a deep purple himation was instantly recognizable as a figure of immense power, a king or a queen whose authority was both political and divinely sanctioned. It was a visual shorthand for royalty that the entire audience, from the front row dignitaries to the distant commoners, could read in an instant. Other colors carried more nuanced meanings. Yellow, for example, was frequently associated with female characters, particularly in comedies, perhaps to denote a vibrant domesticity or simply to provide a bright, visible contrast on stage. Imagine the scene from Euripides' Medea. As the betrayed sorceress plots her horrific revenge, her initial costume might have been of a conventional color, but the moment she decides to destroy her own children, the psychological weight could have been amplified by a shift into the violent crimson of her intentions, a terrifying visual forecast of the blood she is about to spill. In this world, color was never just color, it was character, fate, and emotion, all woven directly into the cloth. Yet while the principal actors were defined by their distinct and amplified silhouettes, the chorus moved as a single, breathing entity. Their costumes were not designed for individual distinction, but to erase it, creating a unified presence that represented the voice of the community. Whether they were playing a group of Theban elders, a band of ocean nymphs, or the terrifying Furies, their identical dress was their most powerful characteristic. Their chitons and himations were typically simpler in cut and more subdued in color than those of the main characters, often in shades of gray, brown, or a uniform white. This visual simplicity served a crucial purpose. It prevented the chorus from visually competing with the protagonists, ensuring the audience's focus remained on the central drama. Their uniformity was the core of their identity, transforming 15 individuals into one collective character, a living, chanting representation of society's wisdom, its fears, or its judgment. When the Furies, the avenging spirits of blood guilt, took the stage in Aeschylus's Eumenides, their matching, perhaps dark and tattered, costumes would have made them appear as a monstrous, multi-limbed creature rising from the earth itself, a far more terrifying spectacle than any single monster could be. Their synchronized movements, all dressed the same, created a hypnotic rhythm that underpinned the entire play, their collective costume making their warnings or laments feel like the undeniable voice of fate itself. But the most profound transformation occurred not with the body, but with the face. The mask, or prosopon, was the absolute heart of this ancient performance, a device so powerful it could turn a single man into a multitude. These were not crude coverings, but masterfully crafted objects, sculpted from lightweight linen stiffened with glue, or sometimes carved from pliable cork or soft wood. Each one was a portrait of a soul, painted with lifelike features and exaggerated expressions to ensure every emotional nuance was visible from the farthest seat. A mask of tragedy would show a mouth agape in a permanent, silent wail, with deeply shadowed eyes conveying a bottomless grief. A comic mask, in contrast, might feature a wide, grotesque grin and bulging eyes, locking the character in a state of absurd hilarity. This was the actor's ultimate tool, allowing him to shed one identity and instantly assume another. In a single play, an actor could step off stage as a heroic king, swap his mask, and return moments later as a conniving slave. The mask did not hide the performer, it replaced him, creating a vessel for the character to inhabit. and cleverly integrated into its open mouth was a small, built-in megaphone, a bronze or leather funnel that amplified the actor's voice, projecting his lines with startling clarity across the vast, open air. The mask was more than a prop. It was a complete instrument of storytelling, merging visual art with acoustic engineering to make the invisible, the character's very spirit, tangibly present for thousands. The mask was a chameleon, shifting its entire being to match the soul of the play being performed. In the solemn world of tragedy, the masks were designed to evoke a sense of idealized humanity, frozen in a moment of profound suffering or noble resolve. These were not the faces of ordinary people, but of heroes and kings, their features perfected and their expressions often strangely serene, even amidst their pain. The mouths were permanently open, not in a scream, but in a perfect rounded O, a shape that served as a built-in megaphone to cast the actor's lamentations to the heavens and the farthest spectator. Their eyes were deep and shadowed, suggesting an inner world of torment and philosophical depth. This idealized quality allowed the audience to project their own emotions onto the character, to see in that serene, pained face a reflection of a universal human struggle against fate. When the hero Oedipus confronted his horrific destiny, his mask would not have shown a contorted grimace of terror, but a dignified, almost beautiful mask of tragic realization, making his downfall all the more poignant and godlike. Comedy, however, demanded an entirely different face. Where tragedy sought to elevate, comedy aimed to distort and ridicule. The masks of comedy were deliberately grotesque, a carnival of exaggerated features designed to provoke immediate laughter and mock social folly. These faces were anything but idealized, with wide, gaping mouths locked in permanent, raucous grins, bulging eyes that seemed to pop with surprise or lust, and wrinkles carved deep to signify old age or buffoonery. Some were outright caricatures, representing well-known public figures or stock characters like the boastful soldier, the cunning slave, or the foolish old man. The mask for a character like the greedy miser would have a pinched, sour expression, while the glutton would have bloated, red cheeks. Every flaw was amplified for humor, turning human weakness into a visual punchline. This stark contrast in design was a direct reflection of the genre's purpose. The tragic mask invited the audience to weep for a fallen king, while the comic mask invited them to laugh at a pompous one. The mask itself, therefore, was the first and most powerful signal of the emotional journey the audience was about to take, a silent promise of either cathartic tears or unrestrained laughter. These masks were masterpieces of theatrical engineering, solving multiple practical problems with a single, elegant solution. One of their most crucial advantages was the sheer speed of transformation they allowed. In a Greek play, only 2 or 3 actors would perform all the speaking roles. Imagine the scene backstage, a flurry of controlled chaos. An actor exits as a noble king, his mask depicting serene authority. In mere moments, he would unfasten his royal himation, perhaps slip into a shorter chiton, and most importantly, exchange his kingly mask for one portraying a grizzled messenger. Stepping back onto the stage, he was an entirely new person. The audience accepted this complete metamorphosis instantly, because the mask was the identity. This system was not just a clever trick, it was a fundamental pillar of Greek drama, allowing a small troupe to tell a story with a vast cast of characters. This practicality extended to one of the most defining conventions of the theater. All roles were played by men. In a society where women had limited public roles, the female characters in these plays were brought to life by male actors. The mask made this believable. A mask carved with delicate, feminine features, painted with fair skin and styled hair, effectively concealed the male face beneath. Combined with a padded costume to suggest a female form and a higher-pitched vocal delivery, the mask completed the illusion, allowing the audience to see and believe in the tragic heroines like Antigone or Medea. But perhaps the most ingenious feature was hidden inside the mask itself. That fixed, open mouth was not just a sculpted expression, it was a built-in acoustic device. Often lined with a small funnel of bronze or hardened leather, It acted as a primitive but effective megaphone. The mask would catch the sound of the actor's voice from inside and project it forward, amplifying his lines so they could reach the very top rows of the massive, open-air amphitheater. This was vital technology in an age without microphones, ensuring that every word of the poet's text was heard, and that unchanging expression, far from being a limitation, forced a new level of physical artistry. With a face frozen in a single emotional state, the actor could not rely on subtle twitches or smiles. Instead, every nuance of feeling had to be channeled through his entire body. A clench of the fists, a slow, heavy gait, a sudden collapse to the knees, or a triumphant, outstretched arm. These gestures became the true vocabulary of emotion. The mask projected the archetype of grief or joy, but the body had to live it, translating the static face into a dynamic, heartbreaking, or hilarious performance. The mask was not a crutch, it was a catalyst for a more profound and physically expressive form of storytelling. When a god stepped onto the stage, the entire atmosphere of the amphitheater shifted. Mortal kings wore purple, but the deities of Olympus needed a costume that screamed divinity itself. Their attire was crafted from the most luxurious materials available, often fine spun linen or even silk, dyed in brilliant, otherworldly hues and sometimes woven with threads of real gold to catch the Mediterranean sun. A simple chiton was not enough. A goddess like Hera or Athena would be draped in multiple layers of shimmering fabric, creating a silhouette that seemed to glow from within. But the true genius of divine costuming lay in the symbolic props, the instantly recognizable attributes that told you exactly which god you were witnessing. An actor holding a stylized, gleaming thunderbolt could be no one but Zeus, the king of the gods. Another, bearing a three-pronged trident, was unmistakably Poseidon, ruler of the seas. Artemis might be adorned with a small silver bow and a crescent moon headdress, while Hermes would wear his signature winged sandals and a traveler's hat. These were not mere accessories, they were a visual shorthand, a way for the playwright to announce divine intervention without a single line of explanation. Imagine the sheer dramatic power of a scene where a mortal hero is on the verge of a fatal mistake. Suddenly, a figure clad in gold and white, holding a lyre, descends from the mechane, the stage crane that represented flight. The audience, recognizing Apollo through his costume and prop alone, would understand in an instant that a higher power had arrived to steer the course of fate. This immediate identification was crucial in a theater without programs or special effects. The costume of a god was their biography and their power, worn on their sleeve for all to see. For a hero or a king, the costume was their legend made visible. While gods relied on symbolic props, mortal royalty and epic heroes were defined by an amplification of the human form, a visual language of power that every citizen in the audience understood. The foundation was still the chiton and himation, but every element was elevated to a state of grandeur. Their chitons were not merely long, they swept the ground, a clear sign of a life free from physical labor. The fabric itself was richer, often a heavier wool or a finer, imported linen that moved with a dignified weight. Over this, the himation was the true crown of cloth. It was larger, woven with intricate borders in threads of gold or silver, and draped in the most complex and imposing styles. A king would not just wear his himation, he would envelop himself in it, creating a silhouette of immense bulk and stability. The color was paramount, with deep, expensive purples and vibrant crimsons dominating, colors that shouted wealth and authority derived from both land and lineage. But the costume did not stop at the fabric. The ultimate symbols of sovereignty were the crown, a delicate metal diadem or a more substantial wreath, and the scepter, a long, ornate staff that was both a weapon of command and a literal support for a figure burdened by the weight of rule. When Agamemnon, the leader of the Greek forces at Troy, walked onto the stage, his entire being communicated kingship before he even spoke of ships and armies. His costume was a map of his power, from the gold embroidered hem of his cloak to the polished scepter in his hand. Yet for some heroes, their identity was tied not to the trappings of a palace, but to the spoils of their superhuman labors. Heracles, the greatest of Greek heroes, was instantly recognizable not by a crown, but by the pelt of the Nemean lion. This was not just a costume piece, it was a trophy, a tangible piece of his myth that he wore draped over his head and shoulders, its fearsome head serving as a helmet. This single, powerful attribute told the entire story of his divine strength and his victory over a monstrous foe. It communicated a different kind of heroism, one born of physical might and wilderness, standing in stark contrast to the political power of a scepter-wielding king. The audience, seeing that lion skin, knew immediately they were in the presence of a demigod, a man who had wrestled his legacy from the jaws of a beast. The challenge of bringing a woman to life on the Athenian stage fell entirely upon the male actor, a transformation achieved through a brilliant, layered illusion. The foundation of this artifice was built directly upon the body. To suggest the female form, actors would strap on padding, carefully placed at the hips and chest. Over this sculpted foundation, they draped a chiton of distinctly feminine design. These robes were crafted from lighter, more pliable fabrics like fine linen, chosen for the way they flowed and clung differently than the heavier wool of a male costume. The colors, too, became a coded language. While a male hero might wear bold purple or red, female characters were often costumed in softer yellows, saffron hues, or pale whites, colors that visually set them apart and signaled their domestic or vulnerable roles within the story. A final, powerful layer of this feminine disguise was the veil. For a character like a grieving queen or a virtuous maiden, the act of drawing a veil over the head was a potent gesture, one that communicated modesty, sorrow, or seclusion in a way the audience understood instantly. But the true key to the illusion was the mask. The prosopon for a female character was carved with deliberately softer, more delicate features, a paler complexion, and an expression of restrained emotion. This was not the gaping mouth of tragic agony, but a smaller, closed-lipped serenity that conformed to ideals of female virtue. When the actor spoke in a higher register and moved with a calculated grace, the combination was utterly convincing. The audience did not see a man pretending. They saw the tragic figure of Hecuba mourning her children or the defiant Antigone facing her fate, her identity complete and her humanity palpable, all conjured from cloth, padding, and a beautifully carved face. But while kings and heroes were draped in grandeur, the silent majority of the ancient world walked the stage in stark simplicity. The costume of a slave or common laborer was a study in deliberate contrast, a visual language of lack that the audience understood at a glance. Their foundational garment was the same chiton, but everything about it was transformed. Instead of fine linen or soft wool, their tunic was woven from coarse, undyed cloth, scratchy against the skin and often left in its natural, dull beige or grayish hue. This was not a blank canvas for expression, but a uniform of humble means. The most telling difference, however, was in its length. Where a noble's chiton swept the ground, a slave's was hitched up high above the knee, secured with a simple rope or leather belt. This was not a fashion choice, but a brutal necessity. It allowed for unrestricted movement, for running errands, hauling burdens, and performing the manual labor that defined their existence. You would never see a slave in the long, dignified folds of a himation. That cloak was the exclusive right of the citizen. A common laborer might at best wear a short, ragged cloak for warmth, but it was a far cry from the draped elegance of his social superiors. They had no crowns, no scepters, no jewelry. Their only accessories were the tools of their trade, a humble basket, a water jug, or a gardener's knife, props that reinforced their role as instruments of others' wills. When a character scurried onto the stage in this short, coarse chiton, the audience didn't need a program. They saw immediately a life defined by service and physical toil, a human fixture of the background whose very costume screamed his place in the social hierarchy without his ever having to say a word. This silent transformation went far deeper than just masks and cloaks, reaching right down to the very shape of the actor's body. To become a character completely, performers would strap on padding known as the himation, a word that essentially means a body-shaped device. This was the ancient world's equivalent of sophisticated prosthetics, used to sculpt the human form into a walking, talking archetype. For comedic roles, the summation was a tool of pure exaggeration. An actor playing a glutton would strap a large, protruding belly over his own, creating an instantly laughable silhouette of overindulgence. An old man, bent by age and wisdom, would achieve his stooped posture not just through acting, but with padding that hunched his shoulders and rounded his back. These physical distortions were immediate visual punchlines, telling the audience exactly who this character was and what human folly they represented before they even uttered a word. But this craft was not limited to comedy. There is compelling evidence that the Greek theater employed early forms of prosthetics for roles that demanded the impossible. When a play called for a mythical creature like a centaur, or a character with a specific physical trait, craftsmen would build extensions and artificial limbs. An actor might strap on hooves, or use a cleverly designed framework to give the illusion of multiple arms or a monstrous torso. There are even accounts suggesting that for characters who had lost a limb in their myth, like the hero Philoctetes with his festering foot, an actor might use a bound or padded leg to signal the disability and the constant pain that defined his story. This was not merely about spectacle, it was about embodying the narrative with every possible tool, using padded forms and crafted extensions to make the fantastical tangible and the human condition, in all its varied forms, visibly, undeniably real. Yet this mastery of the human form was turned completely on its head when the satyrs took the stage. These were not tales of tragic kings or witty philosophers, but wild, chaotic romps set in the untamed woods, and their costumes reflected this shift into pure, unrestrained fantasy. The satyr was a hybrid creature, a constant reminder of humanity's raw, animalistic roots, and its costume was a brilliant patchwork of the civilized and the bestial. At its core was the perizoma, a simple, short loincloth made of rough animal skin or coarse cloth. This was the absolute opposite of the long, dignified chiton, immediately signaling a life free from societal rules and dedicated to physical pleasure and crude instinct. But the true magic happened from the waist down. Actors would strap on furry leggings, often made from shaggy goat hide, transforming their human legs into the powerful, haunched limbs of a wild creature. The final iconic touch was the horsetail, a bushy attachment secured at the base of the spine that would swish and flick with the actor's movements, a constant, visual joke and a symbol of playful, animal energy. This was not the graceful drapery of the main stage, but a costume built for leaping, dancing, and chaotic revelry. It visually shattered the boundary between man and beast, creating a creature that was both recognizably human and thrillingly other. The audience, accustomed to the formal robes of tragedy, would have been immediately disarmed and delighted by this shaggy, chaotic appearance, a clear signal that the rules of decorum were about to be gleefully broken. And then there were the props, the most infamous being the phallus. Often oversized and made of leather, it was worn prominently as part of the satyr's costume, a blatant and hilarious symbol of fertility, lust, and primal comedy. This was not subtle symbolism. It was a punchline built directly into the outfit, ensuring the play's body, rustic humor was visible from every seat in the house. When the chorus of satyrs burst onto the orchestra, their furry legs pounding in a rhythmic dance, their tails swishing, and their exaggerated props leading the way, the visual alone promised a celebration of life's most basic and joyful instincts, a necessary release of laughter after the profound weight of tragedy. The flowing linen of an Egyptian priest's robe might have felt strangely familiar to an Athenian actor. While we often see ancient Greece as a world unto itself, its stages were not isolated from the wider Mediterranean. Trade routes snaked across the sea, bringing not just spices and gold, but ideas, and with them, new ways of dressing a character. Playwrights, always seeking powerful visual shorthand, looked to these foreign styles to instantly define a non-Greek, a barbarian on stage. One of the most telling borrowings was the anaxirides, those distinctive trousers worn by Persian cavalry. To a Greek audience, whose men wore tunics and cloaks, trousers were an immediate and powerful symbol of the exotic East, the realm of the Persian Empire, their great rival. When a character strode onto the stage wearing these tailored leg coverings, the message was unmistakable. This was an outsider, a warrior from a different world, often an antagonist whose customs were as foreign as his clothing. This was not about historical accuracy, but theatrical efficiency, a quick way to paint a character's origin and allegiance with a single, potent garment. Fabrics, too, traveled these routes. While Greek costumes primarily used local wool and linen, contact with Egypt, a land renowned for its exceptionally fine and cool linen, likely introduced new textures and qualities to the theatrical wardrobe. A character meant to seem exceptionally wealthy or connected to ancient, mystic knowledge might be draped in this imported, luxurious cloth, setting them apart from those in coarser, homespun wool. The stage became a map of the known world, its costumes a patchwork of cultural influence, proving that even in its most traditional art forms, Greece was in a constant, creative conversation with its neighbors. Behind every magnificent costume was a single, powerful figure, the Korgos. This wealthy Athenian citizen was not a director or an actor, but the production's financial backbone, personally funding the entire spectacle as a form of civic duty in public competition. His name literally meant chorus leader, but his responsibilities extended to every aspect, from paying the musicians to commissioning the very masks and robes the actors wore. This was a liturgia, a mandatory public service imposed on the richest men in the city, and it was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it was a tremendous financial burden, requiring the Korgos to spend a fortune from his own pocket. On the other, it was an unparalleled opportunity for public glory. The Korgos was competing just as fiercely as the playwright, for a separate prize was awarded for the best production, a victory that would bring him immense prestige and political capital. His personal reputation was now stitched into every golden thread and carved into every mask. This competitive drive for public honor became the engine of theatrical opulence. A Korgos aiming for victory would spare no expense, providing the finest, most expensive materials. He would commission costumes of deep, costly Tyrian purple for his kings, import the most luxurious linen from Egypt for his goddesses, and ensure the masks were masterpieces of carving and paint. This system of private patronage directly fueled an arms race of visual splendor, pushing the boundaries of what was possible on stage and transforming the theater into a dazzling display of civic wealth and artistic innovation. The dazzling spectacle on stage relied on a hidden world of meticulous care and organization backstage, within the quiet confines of the Skene building. This structure, which formed the backdrop for the drama, also served as the costume shop and wardrobe archive for the entire city. After the final applause faded, the actors would retreat into this space, and the real work of preservation would begin. Each mask, each heavy woolen himation, and each delicate linen chiton represented a significant investment of time and money, funded by the Korgos, and they were far too valuable to be treated carelessly. Imagine a team of dedicated attendants, likely slaves with specialized skills, carefully brushing the dust of the performance from the fabrics. They would inspect every seam and fold for signs of wear, meticulously stitching up any tears in the precious cloth. Stains from sweat or the open air would be gently sponged away, and the vibrant dyes, so crucial for visibility, would be touched up or refreshed to ensure the colors continue to shout their meaning across the amphitheater. These costumes were not disposable props. They were essential civic assets, maintained with a reverence befitting their role in the religious festival. This careful maintenance allowed for a sophisticated system of reuse that would feel familiar to any modern theater company. A rich purple himation, commissioned for a king in one year's tragedy, might be carefully stored and then brought out the following year to cloak a different ruler in a new play. The same set of comic masks, with their grotesque grins and bulging eyes, could be repurposed for a whole series of farces, their exaggerated expressions fitting a variety of foolish old men and cunning slaves. Even the elaborate padding, the summation, could be adjusted and restuffed to create a different kind of body for a new character. This was not a sign of poverty, but of profound practicality and a deep understanding of archetypes. The audience's visual vocabulary was built on these recurring elements. A purple cloak always meant royalty. A short chiton always signaled a slave. By reusing these powerful symbols, the theater reinforced its own language, creating a continuity that spanned generations of plays. The storage rooms of the scheme were essentially a library of character, where the physical essence of a hero, a god, or a commoner was preserved on wooden racks and in sturdy chests, waiting for the next playwright to write them a new story. The ultimate test of this system came during the grand dramatic competitions, like the city Dionysia in Athens. Here, each competing playwright would present a trilogy of tragedies followed by a satyr play. This meant a single acting troupe, with just 3 principal actors, had to embody a staggering range of characters across 4 different performances in as many days. The backstage area would have been a whirlwind of controlled chaos, a testament to the efficiency of the storage and maintenance routines. An actor would exit as Agamemnon, his mask and scepter swiftly taken by an attendant. In moments, the royal purple himation would be folded and stored, the kingly mask placed safely in its designated box, and the actor would be redressed in the shaggy leggings and horse tail of a satyr for the next performance. This rapid-fire transformation was only possible because every item had its place, and every piece was kept in a state of performance-ready repair. The silent, unseen work of the backstage crew ensured that the magic never faltered, that the illusion of complete transformation held fast, performance after performance, year after year. The true spectacle was not just what the audience saw, but the flawless, hidden machinery that made it all possible. So how can we be so certain about these costumes when the fabrics themselves have long since turned to dust? We are not working blind, for the ancient world left us a rich visual archive, a puzzle of pottery, stone, and clay. The most vivid windows we have are the vibrant paintings on Greek vases. These were not mere decorations, but functional art, often depicting scenes from the very plays that captivated Athenian audiences. One of the most spectacular examples is the Pronomos vase, a masterpiece from around 400 BC. This large vessel shows the entire cast of a satyr play, celebrating with a playwright and a musician after a successful performance. It is a detailed backstage portrait, frozen in time. We can see the actors still in their full costumes, holding their satyr masks. The intricate padding for the furry legs is visible, the horse tails are clear, and the masks themselves show the wide, grinning expressions of the mythical half-men. This single artifact provides a wealth of confirmation for everything the ancient texts describe. Beyond vases, sculptors carved the essence of theater into stone. Statues and reliefs from the period often depict actors, particularly comic ones, in moments of performance. We see the exaggerated padding of the summation on a comic slave, his belly protruding and his posture stooped. We can study the intricate folds of a himation on a statue of a tragic muse, understanding how the heavy wool was meant to drape and move. And then there are the terracotta figurines, small, fired clay models of actors that were produced in great numbers. These were likely souvenirs, sold to theater goers as mementos of their favorite performances. They are incredibly valuable to us because they show the costumes in 3 dimensions. We can rotate them, study the masks from different angles, and see how the short chiton of a slave differed in cut from the long robe of a king. Yet interpreting these sources comes with its own set of challenges. A vase painting is an artist's interpretation, not a photograph. They might compress a scene or emphasize certain elements for dramatic effect. The colors on a terracotta figurine may have faded over the centuries, leaving us to wonder about the original, shouting hue of a costume. And these artifacts almost always show the actor at a moment of stillness, leaving us to piece together how all that fabric and padding actually moved during a dynamic performance. These silent witnesses from pottery and stone require careful reading, but together, they form a chorus of evidence, each source adding its own voice to reconstruct the spectacular visual world of the ancient stage. The stage was never just a mirror to myth, it was a sharp reflection of the society watching it. Those carefully coded costumes could do more than identify a hero or a slave. They could whisper a potent critique of the very power structures that funded the plays. When a character representing a politician or an orator stepped onto the stage, his costume was a direct echo of the men in the front row seats. He would be draped in the pristine white himation of a citizen, arranged with the precise, dignified folds that screamed civic virtue and moral authority. But the playwright could then use this familiar, respectable image to expose the man beneath. Imagine a character who delivers grand, patriotic speeches while the audience slowly notices the subtle signs of corruption, perhaps a hint of excessively expensive purple dye on the hem of his cloak, a color legally restricted to the truly powerful. Or consider the character who argues for austerity and war, while his own padded summation suggests a life of hidden luxury and overindulgence. The costume established the public image, while the actor's actions and the playwright's words revealed the hypocritical truth, creating a powerful, layered commentary that would have resonated deeply with an Athenian audience navigating the complexities of their own democracy. This visual satire allowed playwrights to question the integrity of their leaders without ever naming them directly, using the universal language of dress to ask, who is this man really, beneath the respectable robe? The critique extended beyond individual politicians to the very fabric of society. In the aftermath of a long and costly war, an audience would have been acutely sensitive to the visual language of wealth and poverty on stage. A play might feature a scene where a wealthy king, draped in gold and purple, callously dismisses the pleas of a chorus of citizens dressed in the short, coarse chitons of the poor. The stark visual contrast between the two groups would have been a silent, heartbreaking commentary on the wealth disparity and social fractures that war often exacerbates. Or consider the costuming of the Erinyes, the Furies, in Aeschylus's Oresteia. Before their transformation into the benevolent Eumenides, they are described as repulsive, monstrous creatures. Their costumes would have been dark, ragged, and terrifying, embodying the old, blood-based justice that the play argues must be supplanted by a new, civic order. Their terrifying appearance was not just for shock, it was a visual argument for the necessity of Athena's new court of law. The audience, living in a city that prided itself on its legal innovations, would have seen in the Furies' horrifying costumes everything their society was trying to leave behind. In this way, a simple piece of cloth was never simple. It was a loaded statement, a question, and a challenge, woven directly into the spectacle for thousands to see and silently debate as they walked home from the theater. The principles perfected on the Athenian stage refused to fade with the marble. They traveled, adapted, and found new life in theaters across centuries. When Rome conquered Greece, they absorbed its drama, but the costumes shifted to reflect Roman taste. The simple Greek chiton was often replaced by the Roman toga, a garment with its own intricate language of folds denoting citizenship and rank. The masks remained, but the grand, emotional masks of Greek tragedy were joined by more realistic Roman portraits, sometimes even bearing the likeness of famous politicians for biting satire. The core idea, however, remained untouched. That costume was a code for an audience to instantly read a character's soul. This visual vocabulary then slept through the Dark Ages, only to reawaken with explosive creativity during the Italian Renaissance. The Commedia dell'arte troupes, with their improvised street performances, relied entirely on stock characters, each defined by a signature mask and costume. The greedy merchant Pantalone, with his hooked nose mask and red tights, was a direct descendant of the comic miser from Athens. The boastful, cowardly soldier Capitano, with his oversized mask and ridiculous military regalia, echoed the Alazan, the braggart soldier of Greek New Comedy. These were not historical recreations, but a vibrant reinterpretation, proving that the Greek concept of archetypal costuming was a timeless tool for immediate storytelling. Even the symbolic use of color persisted. A character in bright yellow might still signal jealousy or deceit, a direct lineage from the Greek stage where color shouted a character's fate. This legacy stretches right into our modern era. In the early 20th century, Visionaries like Edward Gordon Craig called for a return to the superhuman masked figure, arguing against realistic theater in favor of a more symbolic, Greek-inspired stage. You can see this influence in stark, powerful modern productions of Greek plays themselves, where directors might forego historical accuracy altogether. A contemporary Medea might wear a simple, blood-red dress, a minimalist nod to the ancient color coding that conveys all her rage and pain without a single piece of dated fabric. Or consider the chorus in a modern adaptation, no longer dressed identically in tunics, but in matching business suits, transforming the voice of the community into the chilling, uniform voice of corporate or political consensus. The mask, too, has been reinvented. While full facial coverings are rare in realistic drama, the principle of the mask lives on in the heavy, stylized makeup of Japanese no theater or even in the frozen, expressive faces of circus clowns. The Greek stage discovered a fundamental truth about performance, that the body can be amplified and the face can be transformed to speak a deeper, more universal language. Every time a costume designer today chooses a specific color to evoke an emotion, or uses a uniform to represent a group mindset, they are speaking a dialect of a language first woven in ancient Athens. From the coarse wool of a slave's tunic to the gold-threaded robe of a god, every element of the ancient Greek stage was a deliberate and brilliant invention. These costumes solved the fundamental problem of visibility and audibility for thousands, transforming a handful of actors into a cast of heroes, kings, and monsters. But they were far more than practical solutions. They were a dense visual language. The length of a hem, the drape of a cloak, and the shout of a color all worked in concert to tell the audience exactly who a character was and what fate might await them. This was storytelling built not just on words, but on a symphony of visual cues, a system of archetypes and symbols that made epic tales instantly understandable. The legacy of this ancient craft is woven into the very fabric of Western drama, from the stock characters of Renaissance comedy to the symbolic color choices in modern films. These costumes remind us that the most powerful stories are often told not with the voice, but with the entire body, transformed by cloth, mask, and meaning. So, which element of this ancient art captivates you the most, the transformative power of the mask, the silent shout of a purple robe, or the chaotic energy of the satyr's shaggy legs? Let us know your thoughts, and if you enjoyed unraveling this historical mystery with us, subscribe for more journeys into the forgotten corners of the past.